on the 8th of May 1945, Germany surrendered. The U-boats, still at sea, got a clear command from Admiral Karl Dönitz: stop fighting, come up, and give yourselves up. Across the North Atlantic, the Bay of Biscay, and the long, cold fjords of Norway, grey hulls broke the surface like whales coming up to breathe. Crews in worn coats stood quietly on deck, white flags and shaking hands. Above them, Allied planes circled, ready but careful. The war under the waves, the long, secret fight of hunters and hunted, was finally over. They sailed toward places they had once feared: Loch Eriboll in Scotland, Lissahalli in Northern Ireland, Portland in England. Allied ships met them at the edges of these harbors and guided them in slow and stern. Boarding parties climbed over the railings, taking codes and charts, locking away pistols and knives, asking calm questions in hard voices. Engineers walked the narrow passages with clipboards, counting dents, touching rust, noticing engines that coughed like tired lungs. At Loch Eriboll, U-boats gathered by the dozens, a grey forest of masts and periscopes. It looked like a parade, only this parade meant defeat. The men who had lived inside these steel tubes were sent to camps. Some were engineers, and officers kept them up late, asking about batteries and snorkels and strange new designs that could run longer and quieter under the sea. Others just waited, wondered about home, and stared through fences. By winter, many would go back to a Germany that was broken and split in two. But the boats could not go home. They filled harbors from Norway to England, heavy, leaking, and costly to keep afloat. What should be done with them? The answer came like a cold wind: a plan to tow more than 100 U-boats into the open ocean and sink them for good. It had a neat name: Operation Deadlight. The first tows began as storms rolled in, ropes tight as violin strings between tug and submarine. Waves hit like fists. A weak hull groaned. A tow line snapped. The U-boat swung sideways, took a wall of water, and started to roll. Men on the tug shouted. The destroyer turned its guns. Would they save the boat for the sinking ground, or would the Atlantic claim it right here, right now? The tow line screamed like a violin string and snapped. The U-boat swung broadside, the storm hit her like a hammer, and a wall of black water climbed over her deck. For a breath, she seemed to hang there, trembling. Then her bow dipped. Men on the tug yelled for more power. A destroyer turned, guns ready. Operation Deadlight had only one goal: send the boats down. But the Atlantic didn't wait for orders. It took its own. That winter of 1945, the plan rolled on. The Royal Navy counted 156 surrendered U-boats. 116 were tagged for destruction. Tugs pulled them out to 3 lonely places marked on secret charts: XX, YY, and ZZ, about 100 miles northwest of Ireland. There they would be scuttled by gunfire, by explosives, or by opening the sea valves and letting the ocean in. It sounded neat on paper. At sea, nothing was neat. Many of the boats were wrecks already: tanks leaking, engines frozen, hulls thin with rust. Storms slapped the convoys. Tow cables snapped. Some submarines turned sideways and filled like bathtubs. More than a third, 56 in all, went down before they reached the dumping grounds. No rescue, no repair. Deadlight was about endings. When a tow did survive the crossing, the finish was swift. A signal flag rose. Gunnery teams lined up their sights. Shells punched holes along the waterline. Sometimes rockets hissed from aircraft and smashed into steel. The U-boat would take the hits, shiver, and slowly give up, stern lifting like a hand waving goodbye. Bubbles, oil, silence. Names mattered to the sailors who watched. U-2336, the last U-boat to sink Allied ships during the war, came in proud and quiet to Lissahalli in June 1945. In January 1946, off Ireland, she met her end under British guns. U-295 went next. After a hard tow from Loch Ryan, she slid under on the 17th of December 1945. As the winter light died early and cold, the sea kept its trophies. But not every hull was doomed. A few strange, sharp-looking boats wore a newer shape, the type XXI and type XXRI. They were faster underwater, quieter, and built for a longer hidden run. Engineers begged to keep examples for study. so some were spared, pulled into sheds, opened like clocks, and measured carefully. The rest kept going west, toward the line. By February, the operation was closing. Only a handful remained. One of them carried a legend, U-2511, the only Type XXI that had gone to sea truly ready for battle. On the 7th of February 1946, she sat on the gray Atlantic, a perfect target under a perfect winter sky. Orders were read, charges were set, the crew stepped back. There was a cough of flame inside the steel, a deep belly-heavy thump, and the boat shuddered as if waking from a bad dream. The bow dipped, the stern lifted, cameras clicked. Every eye watched the last of the fleet begin to sink slowly, steadily, when a sudden groan rolled across the water, and something inside the submarine tore loose with a sound like the earth itself splitting. The groan rolled over the water like thunder from the deep, and then the last gray shape tilted and slid away. When her wake flattened, a strange quiet settled on the ships. The war beneath the waves was finished, and yet the story of the U-boats was only changing shape. Not all would be graves. Some would become secrets. In offices thick with cigarette smoke, maps and lists replaced gunfire. A new committee formed the Tripartite Naval Commission, and with it, a careful division of spoils. 10 boats for Britain, 10 for the United States, 10 for the Soviet Union. Not the worn-out wrecks they wanted, the sharp new ones, the Type XXI and XX series, the boats built to live underwater instead of dash on the surface. Engineers ran their hands along the smooth hulls, tracing lines that sliced water like a knife. Bigger batteries, a breathing tube called a snorkel, motors that whispered. These were not trophies, they were blueprints for the future. In Britain, a captured boat took a new name, HMS N41, and dived again and again in cold test ranges. Crews watched gauges, counted minutes, pushed her farther each run. In Canada, a surrendered U-boat became a classroom for sound sonar pings, rang off German steel, so trainees could learn the music of a submarine. The Royal Navy set charges near empty hulls. The water leaping as explosions taught them exactly how to crack a boat in two. Every blast was a lesson. Across the ocean, American sailors guided the gray prizes into Portsmouth and New London. They opened panels, weighed propellers, studied periscopes, and copied quiet tricks for the next generation of subs. Then came one boat that felt like a locked room in a spy story, U-234. She hadn't hunted convoys. She had been a courier headed to Japan, belly full of secrets. When she surrendered on the 14th of May 1945, her cargo list made hands tremble, jet engine parts, rare metals, and sealed canisters marked for a faraway ally who had also lost a war. Inside some of those containers was uranium oxide, the kind of powder that could change everything. Meanwhile, in the East, the Soviets rolled captured Type XXIs into their yards and pulled them apart plate by plate. Welds were measured, battery racks sketched, snorkel lines traced. Soon their own whiskey-class subs slid down icy rails into the sea, carrying German ideas under a red star. In the West, officers watched through binoculars that never blinked. The sharing of knowledge had become a race. Smaller flags rose on German silhouettes. In France, a boat called U-123 sailed again as blazon, breathing peacetime air. In Norway, captured subs patrolled coasts once haunted by their kind. Denmark borrowed designs for its shipyards. The steel that once hunted became student and teacher, but the lessons were sharp: balance, speed, silence. Back in America, U-234 met a different fate. After the experts took what they needed and logged every secret, she was scheduled for a weapons test. A clear sky, a calm range, markers bobbing on the swell, cameras ready. A submarine that had carried the raw dust of a new age drifted at anchor, empty of men, heavy with history. On the firing ship, a light flipped from red to green, the tube flooded. A torpedo coughed free and streaked away, white trail tearing the surface aimed straight at U-234. The torpedo's wake cut the water like a chalk line. It struck U-234 square. A bright flash, a deep thud, and the old hull folded in on itself. Foam rose, pieces flew. Then the ocean swallowed what was left. No cheers followed, only quiet. The men on deck understood. This was how a weapon says goodbye to another weapon. Yet even as the blast echoed away, Not every U-boat story ended in fire and bubbles. Some would be given a different fate, a slower, gentler kind of memory. Years passed. Cold Wars warmed and cooled. In a little town near Kiel, a gray shape came to rest on land, beside a tall stone memorial by the sea. It was U-995, once surrendered at Trondheim, once borrowed by Norway, now a museum at Lebault. Visitors lined up to step inside. The hatch clanged. The air felt metal cold. Pipes pressed in from all sides. 45 bunks for 45 men, stacked so close you could breathe the same breath. Kids touched the periscope handles. Old sailors touched the steel and blinked hard. The boat did not roar or dive anymore. It whispered, "Remember." Across the water in France, another story kept going. U-123 had sailed again after the war under a new name, Blazon, doing quiet peacetime work for a navy that had once fought against her. When she finally rested, she stayed in Lorient, the old U-boat base with its thick concrete shelters. People walked past her narrow deck and tried to imagine the Atlantic in winter, the smell of diesel, the slam of a wave taller than a house. In those moments, the line between enemy and human felt thin as a thread. England held a stranger sight. In 1993, a rusted U-boat was found in the Kattegat Strait U-534. Teams brought cranes and cables and careful plans. When the hull rose from the green water, it looked like a whale waking from a long sleep. They cut her into sections so you could see the inside as a cross-section of cramped life. In Birkenhead, people pressed their hands to the glass and stared into rooms the size of closets. You could trace a finger from bow to stern and feel the story like braille wires, valves, dreams, fears. Far away in Chicago, a giant museum made a home for a captured prize from 1944 U-505. She had been taken intact in wartime, searched for secrets, then saved from the scrap heap by people who refused to let her vanish. Now she sat indoors, clean and dark, the first enemy warship displayed on American soil. Lights came up, guides spoke softly, footsteps echoed. Children asked small, brave questions. The answers were heavy but simple. War costs, people matter. And still, the sea kept its share. Off northwest Ireland, the deadlight wrecks lay in lines and clusters, a hidden city of steel in cold mud. Most days, no one thought of them. Then a storm would pass, and fishermen would bring up a strange piece of metal in their nets, and the old map dots would feel suddenly alive again. Back to 1993. Gray sky, wind picking up. The crane's arm swung slowly over U-534. Cables sang, the hull began to lift, water poured from her like tears, then an ugly crack. The steel shifted. A cable snapped with a whip crack, loud enough to freeze every man on deck. The boat lurched in the slings, tilted, and started to slip back toward the sea. The cable snapped like a gunshot. U-534 lurched in the slings, a roaring sheet of water pouring from her broken seams. Men dove for cover. One voice shouted, "Hold her." Another yelled, "Cut the load." The hull tilted, groaned, and began to slide back toward the gray sea that had kept her for almost 50 years. For a breath, the world hung crooked steel, spray, and fear. Then the crane caught again. New lines flew. The slings bit hard. Inch by inch, the boat steadied. The team breathed out as one. This time, the sea would not take her. She rose dripping like a memory pulled from deep sleep. And later, in Birkenhead, people would walk past her cut-open sides and see the cramped rooms where men had once slept, laughed, and prayed. But most of the U-boats stayed where they fell. Off northwest Ireland, in the cold Atlantic mud, the deadlight wrecks slept in long rows, silent, heavy, forgotten. For decades, they were just dots on a chart. Then, between 2001 and 2003, a maritime archaeologist named Innes McCartney went looking. His ship swept the seabed with sonar. The screens lit up with shapes, long, narrow shadows with proud bows and broken decks. Cameras slid down into the dark and came back with pictures, steel ribs, gun mounts, periscope housings, a ladder to nowhere. Many boats had gone down upright, as if still waiting for orders. The scuttlings had been hurried. The sea had been gentle after all, tucking them into the sand like toys put away at night. On land, memory gathered in different shapes. At Lebault, visitors lined up to enter U-995 beside the tall stone memorial. The hatch clanged. Air smelled of oil and old paint. People whispered without meaning to. In France, the old U-123 Blazon rested in Lorient, where huge concrete pens still threw deep shadows. In Chicago, U-505 stood under museum lights, clean and quiet, the first enemy warship Americans could stand beside without fear. Guides told stories. Children asked why the beds were so small, why the ceilings were so low, and where the men kept their letters from home. Slowly, a new truth settled in. The U-boats were not just machines, they were bridges. They carried the weight of ideas, speed, silence, strength, and the heavier weight of lives. Over 30,000 German submariners never came back, and with them, countless Allied sailors. The steel that once symbolized stealth now spoke about cost. It told us that innovation can save or destroy. It reminded us that bravery and grief can live in the same narrow corridor. Today, the story stands in two places at once. Above the water, museums, memorials, and the gray hulls you can touch. Below the water, long lines of boats sleeping in the dark, seagrass drifting over rust like soft fingers. If you listen at Le Beau on a windy day, you can hear the Baltic hiss around the stone. If you listen off Ireland on a calm night, maybe you hear nothing at all. And that too is part of the ending. The empire of steel is quiet now, ended by orders, by storms, by charges set with steady hands, and what remains is a double memorial, one you can walk through and one you can only imagine, far below where the ocean keeps its last slow secrets.